Hi guys, in this lecture we'll talk about creating seamless textures or tileable textures. Shouldn't be too difficult of a lecture, and we'll probably get through it pretty quickly, which was kind of my goal for this week, this holiday week, so that way everybody can kind of drop their shoulders and play catch up if they need to, or relax if they need to. We're starting off in Maya, but this lecture is not going to be very Maya heavy. It's going to actually be Photoshop heavy. Uh, what I have in front of you guys is two different images of concrete. Um, the idea of seamless and tileable textures are that they could repeat over and over again, and um, you wouldn't know that they're repeating over and over again. And what I mean by that is, in theory, is that we could take a texture like this and we could, oops, have it repeat over and over again like this, and we wouldn't notice it. Now we kind of see it repeating already. We want to hit, Control D and repeat it that way. We already see it do that, but we can force it to repeat outside of, just duplicating that model, but have it repeat inside of its UVs. So we are going to take a little bit of a look inside of something called the hypershader. Now we haven't touched much of this inside of Maya this semester. We've been basically working with its material editor over here. And that's fine that we've been using this. It's kind of your go-to in the beginning of the time that you work with Maya is getting comfortable with this, plugging in the necessities of making a model look right. This getting that base color information, getting its bump map information inside of it. The roughness, getting used to just that basic information. And the hyper shader is where you start learning more advanced stuff, and that's where node-based systems start coming in. And this is where things start getting a little bit more hairy. So we'll open up the hyper shader. It's this button up here that kind of looks like an olive or a pool ball or something. It's this guy right here. And I already have a couple of these guys open right here. These are the two shading networks that we see right here, are these two guys. And typically, when you have this guy open, it'll show nothing. There will be nothing inside the scene. But if you want to open up any one of these guys, this right here, this little series of balls that we have right up here, are everything that's inside your scene. They describe visual elements. They could be um, the lighting system that's inside your scene. They could be your basic materials and stuff that are inside your scene. So you see, like it says Lambert 1. And Lambert 2 are those two type of shaders that are inside of my scene that are being used. And there's a standard surface material that was used at some point. So there are materials that are inside the scene that were created, that are inside the scene. That's all it's really describing. So this could be very, very big. And each one of these guys have textures, utilities, rendering, lights, cameras. So this really does build up a very big system inside of our scene. So you will spend a lot more time in this window inside of a course called CG Environments. You get kind of used to what this builds up. This is also where the node that is called displacement gets used. You kind of get it used inside of the material editor, but it's easier to get to function inside of the hyper shader. And as we've been using Substance throughout the course, the Painter software, um, we've been creating something called a height map. This is where that height map could be used, but we haven't been using it because um, we haven't really had any models that have really needed it. Um, but I may come back around to talk about it at some time in the semester, depending if we really get that technical. We'll see. But I wanted to talk about this because this gives us an opportunity to take a look at what really we are doing when we start loading in information with our materials with these guys, this information over here. And right now I'm just using the Lambert information. So you might not be familiar with seeing this stuff. We've been using the AI standard surface, which we've been using, but we still get some of the relative information. Like we pretty much discern what color information is doing. So if I have one of these models selected and I want to see what it's doing inside of this hyper shader, all I need to do is have the model selected, and I can click on this little double dash, the little arrow in and out stuff, and it'll show this initial shading group. And if I click it again, or select the initial shading group and then click it again, it'll break down its node system. So you see these little series of boxes that are connected by wires to each other. And each one of these boxes will say things like, place 2D texture, concrete, Lambert, and then initial shading group. So what does this stuff really mean as we go through? Like I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Our lecture isn't about that. It's about creating seamless and tileable textures. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this. That's why we're only looking at this one little series right here. Basically, what this is saying is that this place 2D texture is our file node. So anytime we click on a file, it's going to go to a place 2D texture. And this is the file that we have loaded. So the file node has to have some sort of UV information into it. And that file says, hey, we're going into that color. So when I click on this, it's the same information. So Lambert 1 and this information over here are the exact same bit of information. And that shader group over here that just kind of describes, what this is. Is it a surface shader? Is it go into the materials? What area is this being listed inside of mine? It's all it's really describing. So I opened this up so that way we can see this guy right here, this place 2D texture. And this is us saying, hey, what type of file is this going to be described as? Is it 2D? Is it 3D? How is it going to be described inside of our scene? And I open this up because we have information about how this is being described inside of our UV editor. When we have our UV editor, this is how it's being described. These guys right here and these guys have that relationship as far as, this place 2D texture and this UV editor has a little bit of a relationship with each other. So we have coverage, which kind of describes how much of it's going to be covering in our UV editor, if it's going to move around in our UV editor. But the one thing we want to be able to describe is its repeat UV. And right now I'll set the 1 to 1. So one of these guys I've already manipulated, okay? And that is the one we're on right now, okay? This is one I've done before I started the lecture, and you'll notice that when I go to repeat UV and I go to changes to 2 by 2, we can kind of see that don't see much of a difference to this. It looks like it's just kind of moving around, but it's not changing. We don't see much of a difference to this. Let's do the same thing to this guy right here, okay? I'm going to load this one up, and we'll click on the same button, have this guy selected right here. I hit the little arrow to arrow, select this guy. Same thing, we're clicking on that place 2D texture, repeat UV, and I'll go to 2 and 2, the same bit of information, and we'll take a look at this. Instantly, we notice something's up. There's a big difference between what we see here and here, okay? Because one of these is tileable. This guy is pretty much tileable. He's not perfect by any means. We might see a little bit of that patterning now that we can compare the two and we know what we're looking for. But this guy's really noticeable right out the gate. It's like, hey, we see this little bit of vignette around here. This is the problem we need to solve, okay? We want to be able to tile this. Now, why would we want to tile this? Let me explain it this way. And then we'll move on to going to Photoshop, and then we'll solve for this fairly easy exercise and move on. Let's say that we are building a larger environment, or we're building a large building. We may have a world that has a very large terrain. Maybe it's very, very large like this. You can see it with this tiled texture, it solves a problem for me. And that would be, how would I make a texture map so large that it would cover something that is miles and miles large? I don't want to have to make a 16K, 32K, an 80,000K texture of dirt. It'd be easier if I just had a 4K texture that was seamless, meaning that I could just repeat it over and over again, and it just gives the illusion that it goes on forever. This is the goal. The same thing with brick. If we're looking at the side of a building, why would I want to make the same brick over and over again if I could just make the brick look like it's going over and over again? That is the purpose of making seamless textures. Okay, and that's why it's so important for us to be able to establish our idea. If we understand this, then we could start working on other things, when we start getting into more advanced topics and courses like CG environments, when we start working with layered textures and layered shaders, where we start looking at things like how do we start making things like dirt and mud and water and other things stack on top of each other with the same idea. How do those type of materials lay on top of each other? It's complicated, but actually less complicated what you think. So let's take a look at how we actually produce these. Now, if you go back into this module, you'll see that we have um, a document that looks like this. So you should be able to download this. There should be also a link inside of the exercise itself where you should be able to download this. I tried keeping it simple. It's always my philosophy to follow the KISS method, keep it simple. So that way you guys could um, follow along with this as much as possible. But the one thing I am not doing is producing the image that you're going to be creating for this. So I'm not giving everybody the same image that I am working with. I'm going to let you guys find your own image to work with to create your own tileable texture. But what I will do is start you off on the path of saying what to avoid and what to look for. There are certain things you can kind of get away with on this, and there are certain things you should probably avoid altogether. So the images that I have this image of concrete here. This is the one we're going to be working with. This is the one that I had with the example that I'll show you guys I was working with. And I got this image of a cracked concrete. So we'll start with this one with the cracked concrete. It's got some good information on it, but it also has some very jarring information on it. This bit of information over here is kind of good. It's got this nice soft kind of detail over here and some soft cracked information. And you would think something like this would be actually very useful for your tileable texture because it's a really nice looking detail, but it's actually more difficult to work with because it would create that pattern. We would see the same crack over and over and over again. So having this right here just immediately to work with is something we'd actually have to end up hiding. So if you find an image that has like a very specific detail on it, like this large crack on it, probably something you want to avoid. If it's something you could probably cut out or something like that and not have to worry about, it's fine. You go ahead and work with it. But if you have something that's very jarring, like a large crack on it, I'd not work with it. The other thing I'd want to say to avoid would be, and this is that image that I had earlier that we were looking at in Maya, and that is something that maybe has like a soft vignette. And by that, let's go back over to Maya and kind of show you what I mean here. Let's go back to this guy. That is this right here. A vignette is something you might not see immediately, but you'll see it when we go through that first little check for if is it something that we can kind of correct. It's very difficult to solve for a vignette because it's gradient and it's soft. It's something it's hard to correct. You can work with it a little bit, but it's not a detail that's easily corrected. I could correct this little spot right here, but it's hard to correct like a softening of an image. If it has like a watermark, I don't really worry about it. If this is like Shutterstock or something like that, I'm not going to take off points because you found a watermark. That's something I'm not concerned with. It's just that, like I say, a big crack on it. If it's something that has like a big vignette, that's just going to be jarring, and like you can't help but to notice it repeating over and over again. Okay, so with that said, let's go back over to Photoshop. We'll go ahead and get rid of this guy because I know this is the one that has a vignette, and I'll show you what I mean by vignette. So I'm going to go to filter, and I'll show you the first thing you will want to do is, first thing we want to do after you download your image, we'll go ahead and unlock it. And then this is the most useful little part right here. We go to window, and when we go to, filter and offset, other, and then offset. And you can see it all right away. This is where that vignette is. Okay, because you see right here is where that's happening. So you can see a little bit of a problem. Now you can correct it a little bit. You can maybe sample from the middle. like this, go into the middle. That way you're staying away from the outside areas where that vignette is happening. That is one possibility. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and close that guy out. I'm not going to save any of my changes. Like I said, I could probably go from this area right here and sample and not sample from this area right here. These are decisions you could make. But the problem is that you're losing detail. Like, I'd rather be able to choose as much of the image as I could rather than going somewhere in the middle because the closer you get to this image, the less detail you're going to have. So we'll go ahead and get rid of this guy as well. All right. So let's go through this step by step. Our goal is to go in between these two documents. The document that you downloaded that you're going to be turning in and the downloaded one that you have over here. You don't have to even go into Maya, but I'd still save this. It could be something you use. You could even use it in the project if you want to that we're getting ready to do. So it's up to you. I don't think we're going to be doing any kind of sidewalks and stuff, so you could choose brick if you want to. It's up to you. But the first thing we're going to want to do is make a square for our texture because our scene, our textures are all square. They're always 2048 by 2048 or 4096 by 4096 or maybe 8K, etc. You're in the idea. We need to make a square. So what I'm going to do is I have my rectangular marquee on and I'm holding onto the shift key, and you can see that when I hold onto the shift key, I can make a selection, and I can move this guy. Oh, I'm sorry. I can move the selection around, and if I hold on to the shift key, I can move it directly left and right. So I can sample where I want to. So I can pull right in the middle if I want to. And I want to kind of do that because I noticed that there's a little bit more density of this area right here. So you can kind of see what I mean. If I look over here and I look over here, see how it's kind of like, if I look at this edge right here, how it's kind of smooth. If I look over here, it's kind of dense. So I can automatically know I'm going to get a seam. So if I go right in the middle, I'm not going to have that. And then I'm just going to go to image and crop. So I know this is a perfect square. It's not going to be 4K. I can tell you right now, this is an image that I pulled offline. I know this is going to be maybe even smaller than a 1K. It could be like 512. No, probably not 512. It's not going to be an absolute. It's not going to be a really great texture for example, but it's going to work for what we're doing. So I'm going to hit Control D to deselect. And I always like to make a duplicate just to have something base start off of. I do it just because it's better to have a parachute and not need it than need a parachute and not have it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to duplicate layer, and I have a little duplicate layer option over here. It flew over the other window. I'm just going to click OK and hide this guy. And I just showed you guys this tool before. We're going to go to Window, and I'm sorry, not Window, but Filter, Other, and Offset. Okay, and now you can see right here, this is the seam that I need to correct right here and right here. I can move this around a little bit and up and down, and what this will allow me to do is find that almost direct middle, and I'm going to click on OK. Because my goal is now, and this is just how simple this assignment is, okay? I'm going to hit Control Z real quick first, just because I just want to see what's going to happen real quick. My goal is now is to first, before I move forward, is to take this image and move it over to my untitled work. So we're going over to the other guy. So I'm going to go and pull this guy down. We'll place the original. I could even, hit Control T and free transform. It's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then we'll hop back over here. Now what I'm going to do is go back and do that one. Go to Filter, Offset. Let's use my last one chosen. So now I can go in here and I'm going to use the Clone Stamp tool. Now the Clone Stamp tool is a pretty easy tool to use. All you need to do is first sample an area that you want to clone stamp from. So you can see on opposite ends here what I want to use. So if I hold on to the Alt key, I can sample from over here. And then you can see where it's like choosing this little spot here. And then I just kind of draw over. Now I got to be careful because if I move too far over, I got to start drawing that fine line again. Another thing I might want to do is soften that brush, and that's going to help kind of keep that edge from ever being hard. So you can see what I'm doing is kind of softening that edge from ever being created. So I'm just kind of going around here, and you can see that hard edge is kind of disappearing almost immediately as I go through this. And you see I'm just kind of wiggling down this also. I'll go ahead and sample from maybe at the top here, and I'm just kind of getting rid of that other top edge. May even get rid of this guy right here. Anything that I think I might see repeat over and over again, I'm trying to get rid of. I'll zoom out a little bit, and then I look for like any other areas that look like it might be repeating, and I'll come back in. This type of stuff that has lots of noise on it works pretty well because the noisier something is, the easier it kind of works out. Like things that have lots of pebbles on it and stuff, things that have lots of good, like I say, noise to it. So now, before I start trying to see whether or not this is going to work, um, I could do a few things here. I believe, and I'm going to pause the video just to double check this real quick. Okay. I just wanted to double check and make sure that Adobe didn't make any changes to the process of this. I want to make sure that I'm making a tileable texture before I move on to the next part, which is, making a um, tileable area. And this is easy. Like we're basically kind of done. All I need to do is first I'm going to make a rectangular selection over everything. So I'm selecting everything right here. And then I'm going to go to edit. And then I'm just going to go to define pattern. Okay, so I'm selecting everything. And then you'll see it says like concrete, JPEG. It's whatever your image is named. And then you'll click OK. So you should have that somewhere inside of Adobe now. It's saved it. So I just went to File, New, and then chose um, a print document, something that was larger. I chose something that was like 8.5 by 11, and then I just went to a new document. And then under the clone stamp, you have pattern stamp tool. And then under your pattern, which would be up here, you'll see that you have your new created pattern. And then I just went to the size of this and made it really large. And if I started filling this in, you can see now we're filling in that pattern of our brush, and it's doing it over and over and over again. I made it larger because I wanted to have that repeat. I couldn't do it on the same layer because it's the same size. So I've been still making one single one, but you can see now we're making that pattern over and over again. We might start seeing the pattern over and over again. You might see where you might need to make some adjustments. So you can see this little hole, stuff might be repeating too many times. So now I'll go back over here and look for that hole, like right here. There it is. So what I'll do is go back over to this guy, Control B. And what I'll do is maybe offset it again. Offsetting it a couple times to see where I might find a new pattern happening. So let's go back to filter, other, offset. I'll click OK. This guy right here is kind of the issue because I could see it over and over again. So I'll go back over to switch this back over to clone stamp. I'll choose this and just kind of fill it in. I'll look for something else, like maybe this guy looks like he's patterning. This looks like it might be patterning. And I did notice that this whole thing right here tends to pattern, so I'm just kind of going over it. Like I say, it's pretty forgiving. Anything that has lots of noise to it can be pretty forgiving. So I'm just looking for things like I can erase pretty quickly. Let's go back and make a new pattern. Edit. And then we're going back to the define pattern. So where's that at again? Define pattern. And I'll call this new pat. Then I'll go back over here. We'll go ahead and, um, let's go ahead and delete this guy and make a new one. File, new, print, letter. We'll switch this back over to clone. Not clone, but pattern. Make sure we're on the new pat. This guy right here. Check that out. It's really hard to start finding that pattern. You can still find it a few other places, but this is pretty forgiving. I can still find maybe this area right here, this area right here, but it's getting to that point now. It's getting harder and harder to find. So I'm going to call it right here, so that way we're not, spending way too much time on this. My goal was to kind of keep this week's lectures really short. So what I'm going to do now is just maybe fill this in a little bit more, because we just need a sample from this area right here for the last bit of our worksheet. So what I'm going to do, now that I have this, we'll go ahead and tear this guy down. And we'll tear this guy down, just because we still need this guy right here. So this is my adjusted one. So I'm going to pull this guy over. Then we'll go ahead and minimize it, because we don't need this guy in the way. We'll move you over here just for the moment, just out of the way, so you see what we're doing. Control T to kind of fill it up. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. That way I could kind of just see what the adjustments were for this. Now I'm going to pull this guy over. We'll do a quick marquee selection, and I'm going to keep this square. I'm holding on to the shift key. We kind of see the patterning of this guy, and that's fine. I'm going to pull this guy over. Oops. Make sure I got my move selection on. I want to be able to grab it. There we go. Little T to go and free transform this guy back down. Hit the return key. Move this guy out of the way. And then we're done. File, export, export as. Have as a, nope, not this one though. This guy. Make sure we're on the right one. File, export as, or save as, depending on which version or what you've done. Photoshop, you might be still saving as a JPEG or whatever. And then you just export this as, this is going to be your last name underscore seamless underscore texture. You should be done. And that is how you make a seamless texture. And if you want to, you could place this on top of a image, or I'm sorry, a texture inside of, Maya. Of course, you'd be using the one that's inside of Maya. That would be this one right here. That would be the one you'd want to use, and you'd have to be able to create a normal map from it, etc., etc. So it'd still have to be some process working through this, but just to get that color information, just to get that whole process down, would be where you'd want to start from this. But this is the whole concept really of being able to create a seamless texture. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to send me an email, and I look forward to seeing what you guys create. Talk to you soon.